Silas stepped backward, like I had just told him something unforgivable. We were standing at the altar, surrounded by 200 people, the officiant holding his Bible with both hands, waiting for us to say the words we had rehearsed a dozen times. But Silas wasn't looking at the officiant anymore. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between panic and determination, like he had just made a decision he couldn't take back. "I can't do this," he said, his voice carrying through the silent church like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the pews. Someone dropped a program, the sound echoing against the stone floor. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, leaving me alone in my white dress, with my veil trembling in my hands and every single eye in that room drilling into me like I was the scandal, like I was the problem, like this was somehow my fault. And no one followed him. Not one person stood up to stop him or ask him what he was doing. They all just sat there, frozen, watching me. The officiant's mouth hung open. My mother's face collapsed in the third row, her hand clutching her chest. A coworker from my office covered her mouth. The whispers started immediately, crawling up my spine like insects I couldn't brush away. Silas didn't just leave me, he left me to carry it all. I didn't scream, I didn't faint. I didn't do any of the things people probably expected me to do. I stood there in my white dress that cost $3,000, the one I had tried on 7 times before choosing, the one that was supposed to make this day perfect. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might fall, but I locked my knees and stayed upright. The officiant whispered my name, his voice gentle and pitying. I couldn't hear him over the roar in my ears, over the sound of my own heartbeat thundering like drums. Every face in that church was turned toward me, watching, judging, waiting to see what I would do next. My bridesmaids stood frozen behind me, their bouquets hanging limp in their hands. My maid of honor took a step forward like she wanted to help, but I shook my head. I didn't need help. I needed to get out of there with whatever dignity I had left. So I lifted my chin, straightened my shoulders, and walked down that aisle alone. Each step echoed in the terrible silence, my heels clicking against the stone floor like a countdown. Someone reached for me as I passed, an aunt or cousin whose name I couldn't remember in that moment. I pulled away, not rudely but firmly. I didn't want comfort. I didn't want pity. I just wanted air, space, distance from all those eyes. The walk felt endless, like one of those nightmares where you run but never get anywhere. Every face I passed looked at me with pity or confusion or something worse, something that looked almost like satisfaction, like they had known this would happen and were glad to be proven right. My father stood at the end of the aisle, his hands reaching out, his face twisted with anger and helplessness. But I walked past him too. I couldn't let anyone touch me or I would shatter. Outside, the sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too cheerful, too normal for what had just happened. My bridesmaids rushed after me, their voices blending together into meaningless noise. I remember thinking, if this is how he wins, I will let him think he has, because anger makes noise. But silence rearranges rooms. Silence shifts power in ways people don't see coming. My name is Mara Whitlock. I am 32 years old, white American, raised in a household where composure was valued above almost everything else. My parents taught me that emotions were private, that contracts mattered more than promises, that you handled your business quietly and efficiently. I work in regulatory compliance for a mid-sized financial firm, which means I spend my days reading contracts, finding the fine print other people miss, making sure companies follow the rules they agreed to follow. I spot the loopholes. I close the gaps. I document everything. It is quiet power, the kind that is invisible until it is not, until it matters, until someone realizes too late that they should have been paying attention. Before I continue with my story, I need to pause for a moment. I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach, knowing that somewhere someone else might need to hear this. Sometimes even the smallest connection makes a heavy story feel a little less lonely. Thank you for being here. And if this kind of real human story matters to you, please consider subscribing. Silas Crow was the kind of man people admired without questioning why. Charismatic in that effortless way that made you feel special just for being in his presence. polished, always dressed perfectly, always saying the right thing at the right time. He was a rising figure at his law firm, the golden boy everyone predicted would make partner before 40. People said I was lucky to have him, that he was out of my league, that I should be grateful he had chosen me out of all the women who wanted him. What they didn't see was how often he corrected me in private, his voice patient but firm, like I was a student who kept making the same mistake. How he borrowed my contacts, the professional connections I had spent years building, and never mentioned my name when they helped him land a client or close a deal. How he asked me to soften myself at events, to let him lead conversations, to laugh at his jokes even when they weren't funny, to make myself smaller so he could look bigger. Love, he said, was compromise. What he meant was compliance. What he meant was disappear. The prenup was his idea, brought up casually one evening about 6 months before the wedding. We were sitting in his apartment, the expensive one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, drinking wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Just optics, he said, swirling ice in his glass like we were discussing vacation plans. My partners expect it. It makes me look responsible, like I am taking the marriage seriously from a business perspective. He smiled that charming smile that had made me fall for him in the first place. I read every line of that prenup carefully, spending 3 evenings going through it with a highlighter and a notepad. Silas skimmed it in 20 minutes, barely looking up from his phone. When I insisted on adding one specific clause, he laughed, that indulgent laugh he used when he thought I was being cute or silly. Relax, Mara. That will never matter. We are going to be together forever. He signed without asking why it was there, without asking what it protected or what it meant. He didn't ask how I knew to include it or where I got the language. He just wanted it done so we could move on. The clause wasn't about cheating, though that would have been the obvious thing to protect against. It wasn't about divorce or custody or any of the usual prenup concerns. It was about public abandonment, causing reputational harm, especially in professional settings tied to shared networks. The language was specific and carefully crafted. If he left me in a way that damaged my professional reputation, publicly and in front of colleagues or clients or anyone connected to our shared professional world, the contract allowed me to disclose the circumstances to any relevant professional bodies, partners, or stakeholders in his network. It wasn't punitive. It didn't demand money or property. It was protective, giving me the right to tell the truth if his actions hurt my career. He didn't ask how I knew to include it, because he didn't think he would ever need to know. Silas never imagined leaving me, not back then, when we were still in the honeymoon phase and everything felt possible. And when he did decide to leave, when whatever changed in his heart or mind made him want out, he was so confident in his control, so certain of his power, that he didn't bother checking what he had signed 3 years earlier. By Monday morning, barely 48 hours after the wedding that never happened, the story had already mutated into something unrecognizable. I heard it in whispers at the coffee shop near my office, in the voices of people who thought I couldn't hear them. People said I was too intense, that I had driven him away with my ambition and my need to control everything, that I was cold, calculating, impossible to love, that he had escaped before making a terrible mistake. Silas let it spread like a virus through our shared social circles. He didn't correct anyone, he didn't defend me, he just let them rewrite history so he was the victim and I was the villain. I said nothing. I didn't defend myself on social media. I didn't send angry texts or leave tearful voicemails. I didn't show up at his apartment demanding answers. Instead, I forwarded one document to my attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in contract law, and went to work like nothing had happened. My coworkers watched me carefully, tiptoeing around me like I was a bomb that might explode. They expected tears. They expected a breakdown. They expected me to take time off, to fall apart, to prove them right about how devastating this must be. What they got was calm, controlled, professional Mara showing up every day at 8:30, filing her reports, answering her emails, attending her meetings. I smiled when appropriate. I participated in discussions. I did my job exactly the way I had always done it. People didn't know what to do with that. with my refusal to perform the grief they expected. Someone from HR called me into her office, her face full of concern, and asked if I needed time off to process. I told her I was fine, that work was actually helping me move forward. She looked at me like she didn't believe me, like my composure was somehow more concerning than a breakdown would have been. But silence is not emptiness. It is strategy. It is control. And while Silas was out there trying to manage his image, trying to explain himself to people who were starting to ask uncomfortable questions, I was building a case he didn't even know existed. Not with lies, not with revenge, not with emotional manipulation, just with facts. Just with the truth he thought no one would care about, the truth he thought he could bury under charm and charisma and carefully crafted explanations. Silas tried to finalize a partnership deal that week, the merger he had been working toward for 18 months. It was the thing he wanted most in the world, the promotion that would cement his status, that would prove he had made it. The background review flagged something during the final compliance check, something small enough to miss but significant enough to pause the process. A notation about pending contractual liability tied to reputational risk. The phrasing was deliberately vague, designed to raise questions without providing answers. The meeting was postponed, not canceled, just delayed, while the partners looked into it more carefully. Silas called me for the first time since the wedding, his name lighting up my phone screen while I sat at my desk eating lunch. I watched it ring, watched his name flash 3 times before the voicemail picked up. He called again an hour later, and again that evening. I didn't answer any of them. I wanted him to sit with his confusion, to wonder what I knew and what I had done, to feel the first stirrings of fear that maybe walking away wouldn't be as clean as he thought. At work, people watched me carefully, waiting for the crack in my armor that never came. My boss, a woman named Sandra who had always been kind but distant, called me into her office on Wednesday afternoon. "Mara," she said, her voice gentle, "I want you to know that if you need time off, we can arrange that. No one would blame you for needing space to process what happened." I appreciated the offer, genuinely, but I told her I was fine, that staying busy was helping me cope, that work gave me structure when everything else felt chaotic. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for signs of the breakdown she expected. "You are handling this with remarkable grace," she finally said, and I heard the unspoken question beneath the compliment. "How are you so calm? How are you not falling apart?" The truth was that I had already done my falling apart in private, in the shower where no one could hear me cry, in my apartment where I could scream into a pillow and let out the rage and pain and humiliation I refused to show the world. Silas mistook my silence for surrender, for acceptance, for the defeat of someone who knew she had lost. That is the mistake men like him always make. They think quiet means weak. They think compliance means defeat. They think that because you are not screaming, you are not fighting, but I was fighting every single day, just not in the way he expected. I was documenting everything, keeping records of every phone call, every text message, every social media post where his friends defended him by tearing me down. I was building a timeline, a narrative, a case. A professional ethics board requested clarification regarding his public conduct 2 weeks after the wedding. They had questions, carefully worded and professionally phrased. Questions about judgment, about reliability, about character. Questions about why a man so careful with his image, so concerned with how he was perceived, would detonate his own wedding in front of colleagues, clients, and industry contacts. The optics were terrible. Abandoning your bride at the altar suggested instability, poor impulse control, questionable decision-making. It suggested someone who couldn't handle pressure, someone whose personal life might bleed into their professional responsibilities. Silas blamed stress when they asked him to explain. He told them he had been overwhelmed, that the relationship hadn't been working for a while, that he had made a difficult choice in a difficult moment. He tried to paint himself as someone who had the courage to be honest, to stop something that was wrong before it was too late. But they didn't buy it, because the story didn't make sense. If the relationship wasn't working, why go through with the wedding planning at all? Why send invitations? Why stand at the altar? Why wait until the ceremony in front of 200 people to make your exit? The inconsistency was the problem. And inconsistency raises red flags in professional environments where trust and reliability are everything. They didn't fire him. They didn't formally reprimand him. But they started asking questions, started looking at him differently, started wondering what else they might have missed. And once people start questioning you, once doubt enters the conversation, it is almost impossible to erase. Every interaction becomes evidence. Every decision becomes suspect. The foundation of trust that took years to build begins to crack, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. He showed up at my apartment 3 weeks after the wedding, unannounced, standing at my door at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. I looked through the peephole and saw him there, not angry but afraid, his confidence stripped away, his charm replaced by desperation. I considered not opening the door, letting him stand there until he gave up, but I wanted to see his face, wanted to watch him scramble for explanations. So I opened it, just wide enough to see him, but not wide enough to invite him in. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice tight, strained. "What did you tell them? What is happening to me?" I met his eyes, steady, calm, giving him nothing. "Nothing," I said, and it was completely true. I hadn't called the ethics board. I hadn't filed a complaint. I hadn't whispered to mutual colleagues or spread rumors or done any of the things he was imagining. The clause had simply done what it was designed to do, activated automatically when the conditions were met, disclosing the facts to the relevant parties without requiring me to lift a finger. He stared at me, searching for something he could fight, some accusation he could deny, some weapon he could turn against me. But there was nothing, no lie, no scheme, no vendetta, just consequences he had signed his name to and forgotten about. "You planned this," he said, his voice rising with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You set me up." I shook my head slowly. "I protected myself. You just didn't bother to notice. You signed something without reading it, Silas. That is not my fault. That is yours." He opened his mouth to argue, to explain, to make me understand whatever he thought I was missing. But no words came out, because he knew I was right. He knew he had done exactly what I said, skimmed past something important because he assumed it would never matter, because he assumed I would never have the courage or the calculation to use it against him. "Stay away from me," I said quietly, firmly. "Don't come back here. Don't call me. Don't contact me unless it is through your attorney. We are done." And I closed the door in his face. My silence made room for facts to travel quietly, legally, through proper channels. People began reassessing Silas without my help, without my influence, simply because the information was now available and they could no longer ignore it. His colleagues started asking themselves why someone so polished, so careful, so concerned with appearances would implode so publicly. His clients started questioning his judgment, wondering if someone who made such a spectacular mistake in his personal life might make similar mistakes in his professional one. His partners started wondering if he was a liability, a risk they couldn't afford. Reputation is fragile when it is built on performance instead of substance, on charm instead of character. And the thing about reputational damage is that you cannot argue with it, cannot fight it, cannot make it go away with explanations or apologies or carefully crafted statements. Once people start questioning you, once doubt enters their minds, the questions multiply like bacteria. Every meeting becomes a test, every interaction becomes evidence, every decision is scrutinized in ways it never was before. The prenup clause didn't demand punishment or revenge, it demanded disclosure, simple and factual, to partners, to boards, to stakeholders, to anyone who needed to know that the public abandonment had occurred and that it had caused professional harm to me. The disclosure was clinical, stripped of emotion, just a statement of facts backed by the contract both parties had signed. It didn't editorialize, it didn't accuse, it simply stated what had happened, what the consequences were according to the agreement, and what rights the injured party now held. Suddenly, every negotiation Silas entered required explanation. Every deal came with questions. Every room felt colder to him, less welcoming, more skeptical. His partners asked questions he couldn't answer without sounding defensive. His clients hesitated before signing contracts, wondering if this was someone they could trust with their business. His reputation, which had always been his greatest asset, the thing that opened doors and smoothed paths, was now his greatest burden. And all of it was happening because he had ignored a clause he thought would never matter, because he had underestimated the woman he left standing at the altar. I was invited to speak on panels about professional resilience, about handling personal crises while maintaining career integrity. Asked to consult on compliance issues for firms that wanted to avoid the kind of mess Silas was now drowning in. Not as the woman who had been left at the altar, not as a victim or a cautionary tale, but as the professional who had handled a devastating personal crisis with restraint, intelligence, and strategic thinking. People respected how I had carried myself. They admired my composure. My name started appearing in industry publications, quoted in articles about crisis management and professional boundaries. I was building my own reputation now, separate from Silas, stronger than anything we had shared when we were together. And Silas watched it happen, watched me rise without touching him, without needing him, without even acknowledging his existence. That hurt more than any confrontation ever could, because he realized he hadn't destroyed me like he thought he would. He had freed me. And while he was scrambling to save his career, fighting fires he had started himself, I was thriving in mine, speaking at conferences, taking on bigger clients, proving that I had never needed him to succeed. He tried to control the narrative one last time, releasing a statement through his firm's communications team about 6 weeks after the wedding. It was vague, defensive, carefully worded to say nothing while implying everything. The statement talked about personal challenges and difficult decisions made during a time of reflection, without naming me or the wedding or any of the specifics that everyone already knew. It sounded hollow, performative, like someone reading from a script they didn't believe. People trust patterns, not apologies. And the pattern people saw was a man who had embarrassed himself publicly and was now trying to rewrite history, trying to make himself look thoughtful and brave when everyone remembered him walking out of a church while his bride stood alone. The statement made things worse, not better. It reminded people of what had happened just when the story was starting to fade. It brought the conversation back to the forefront, back into office gossip and professional circles that had started moving on. His partners were furious. They told him to stay quiet, to let it die, but Silas couldn't. He needed to be heard. He needed to be understood. His bonus was frozen that quarter. His equity stake reconsidered during the annual partner review. The firm called it risk mitigation, a standard procedure when someone becomes a potential liability. I called it consequence, the natural result of choices made and prices paid. They didn't fire him, not yet, but they pulled back in ways that mattered. They stopped giving him the high-profile clients, the ones that brought prestige and big billings. They stopped inviting him to the important meetings where decisions were made and futures were shaped. He was still employed, his name still on the letterhead, but he was sidelined, pushed to the margins, made invisible in the ways that hurt most. I heard about it through mutual contacts who didn't know we weren't speaking anymore, who thought they were sharing harmless gossip. They told me about his decline like it was drama, entertainment, a story with twists they hadn't seen coming. But to me, it was just math, just the predictable outcome of actions and reactions. Contracts have terms. Systems have processes. Silas had signed something without reading it, made assumptions without checking them, and now he was paying the price. There was no emotion in it for me anymore, no satisfaction or glee or vindication, just the cold clarity of watching a system work exactly the way it was designed to work. Friends told me it was over, that I had won, that I should move on and let it go. They meant well, trying to help me find closure, trying to push me toward forgiveness and healing. But they didn't understand. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge or punishment or making him suffer. It was about justice, about making sure that walking away from me cost him something real, something that mattered. Because if it didn't, if he could just leave and face no consequences, then what was the point of any of it? What was the point of the prenup, the clause, the years I had spent building a life with someone who saw me as an accessory to his success rather than a partner? Then another email came in, not from Silas, but from his firm's internal compliance department. A routine audit, they said, standard procedure for all senior associates. But everyone who worked in compliance knew that routine audits were never routine, that they only happened when someone had given the firm a reason to look closer. This one was exhaustive, going back 3 years, examining every decision Silas had made, every shortcut he had taken, every corner he had cut when he thought no one was watching. The audit revealed things even I didn't know about, hadn't suspected, couldn't have predicted. Billing irregularities, small at first, but adding up over time. Misrepresented hours charged to clients who trusted him. Nothing criminal, nothing that would result in prosecution, but enough to raise serious ethical questions about his judgment and his integrity. Silas had always been careless with details he found boring, always assumed someone else would clean up his messes, or that small mistakes didn't matter in the bigger picture. But now there was no one to protect him. No charm to smooth things over, no reputation to fall back on. They gave him a choice, delivered in a closed-door meeting with 3 partners who had once championed him. Resign quietly, take a severance package, leave with a neutral reference, or face formal proceedings that would become public record that would follow him for the rest of his career. He chose resignation. A strategic exit, he called it when he told the few people who still took his calls. No ceremony, no farewell party, no champagne toast or plaque thanking him for his years of service. Just a quiet disappearance, his name removed from the website, his office reassigned, his files boxed up and stored in a basement somewhere. Within a week, it was like he had never been there at all. The firm moved on without him, filling his position with someone younger, someone hungry, someone who hadn't yet learned to cut corners. And the silence that followed him was permanent, deeper than any scandal or controversy. People stopped asking about him. His name dropped out of conversations. He became a cautionary tale, whispered about in break rooms, but never spoken aloud in meetings, a reminder of what happened when you let personal drama bleed into professional spaces. Months later, I attended another wedding, a different couple in the same church where my own ceremony had ended in disaster. I stood tall this time, wearing a dress I had chosen because I loved it, not because someone told me it was appropriate or flattering or suitable for the occasion. The space felt smaller now, less imposing, less significant. I had outgrown it, outgrown the fear and shame that had filled me that day. The bride smiled at me from the altar, a genuine smile with no pity or awkwardness, and I smiled back. There was no fear in her eyes, no worry that what happened to me might happen to her. Just joy, just hope, just the belief that her story would be different. I realized something in that moment, standing in that church surrounded by strangers celebrating love. Silas hadn't broken me. He had tested me. And I had passed. I had survived the worst thing I thought could happen, the most public humiliation I could imagine, and I had come out stronger on the other side, not bitter, not broken, not twisted by revenge or consumed by anger, just clear. Clear about who I was, what I valued, what I would never tolerate again. That clarity was worth more than any marriage could have given me, worth more than the life I had planned with someone who never really saw me. I took a leadership role at my firm shortly after that, a position I had once been told I was too sharp for, too direct, too unwilling to soften my edges. The same supervisor who had said that now reported to me. I didn't gloat, I didn't remind him of his words or make him feel small. I just did the work, led the team, made the decisions that needed to be made. Turns out sharp is useful when truth matters, when someone needs to cut through nonsense and see things clearly. Turns out the qualities that make you difficult in a relationship make you invaluable in a boardroom. Silas lost the thing he cared about most in the end. Not money, though his income dropped significantly. Not status, though his position evaporated. Being admired, being remembered, being important. People stopped talking about him entirely. His name faded from industry conversations. He became forgettable, which for someone like him was worse than being hated. At least hatred means you still matter, that you still have the power to affect people. Forgetting means you never did, that your presence was always more about performance than substance. I heard through distant connections that he moved to another city, started over somewhere no one knew his name or his history. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything, really. No satisfaction or vindication or closure. He had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. That was all. There was no villain in this story, just a man who thought he could walk away without paying, and a woman who made sure the bill came due. And the lesson I learned, the one I want you to remember, is this: never confuse quiet women with powerless ones, and never ever sign something you don't bother to read.